He was used to signing million-dollar contracts without blinking. But when an 8-year-old girl in a worn maid's dress walked into his office and said, "My mom is sick. I'll be working instead of her," his world cracked open. He thought it was just pity. He was wrong. It was fate. The office was quiet, the kind of silence that settles deep into the walls long after everyone else has left. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering skyline of New York City, but inside, everything was still, except for the soft tap of keys and the occasional sigh from the man behind the desk. Andrew Clark sat at his massive oak desk, reviewing financial reports that should have been delegated hours ago. His tailored light gray suit was still crisp despite the late hour. His dark brown hair was slightly tousled from running his fingers through it, a nervous habit that surfaced whenever he was deep in thought. The lamp beside him cast warm light across his face, highlighting the quiet sharpness of his cheekbones and the faint shadow under his eyes. 35 and already a legend in the tech industry, but with nothing waiting for him at home but silence. Just as he reached for his coffee, now cold, there was a knock at the door. Not the brisk, confident knock of an assistant or colleague, but something softer, hesitant, almost apologetic. He frowned and glanced at the clock. It was past 9 p.m. Most of the building was empty. "Come in," he said, expecting maybe security or one of the cleaners. The door opened slowly, and to his complete surprise, a small girl stepped inside. No more than 8 years old. Her brown hair was tied in a messy ponytail, her dress, clearly a maid's uniform, hung slightly too large on her narrow shoulders. Her shoes were scuffed. Her eyes, the same rich brown as his own, met his without flinching. For a long moment, Andrew just stared. She didn't move. She looked like something out of place, a ghost from a different world that had accidentally wandered into his. "Who are you?" he asked, more confused than stern. "My name is Lily," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "My mom is Sarah. She usually cleans the offices here." Andrew leaned forward slightly. "Where is she?" "She's sick," Lily replied. "Really sick. She couldn't come today. So I did." He blinked. "You came to clean?" She nodded. "We need money. We don't have anyone else. Just me and Mom. She needs medicine. And food. And I can work. I can help." Andrew stood slowly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and the child looked even smaller now. Something twisted in his chest. Pity, confusion, a strange ache he didn't recognize. "You shouldn't be here. You're just a kid." "I know," Lily said quickly. "But I'm good at cleaning. I help her all the time at home. And I know where everything goes. Please don't send me away." She held up a small plastic bucket and a cloth. Her hands were clean, but her fingernails were bitten. There was something heartbreaking about how formal she tried to be, how she squared her shoulders like a grown-up, how her lips trembled slightly even as she tried to be brave. Andrew hesitated. This was absurd. Dangerous. Irresponsible. But also, how had no one noticed this girl? Why was she here, alone, after dark? "Where's your father?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then looked down. "He left. A long time ago." Silence filled the room again, thick and uncomfortable. Outside the window, the lights of the city flickered. Inside, Andrew's world shifted. He had spent years building empires, leading mergers, dominating boardrooms, but in this moment, he had no idea what to do with one small girl in a too big uniform standing in front of him with quiet dignity and no one to call for help. He finally spoke. "All right," he said slowly. "You don't need to clean. Sit down. Let's talk." She looked up at him, not quite trusting yet, but no longer afraid, and carefully stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Something about that small, deliberate motion felt final, like the start of something neither of them could name yet. But nothing in Andrew's life would ever be the same. The next morning, Andrew arrived at the office earlier than usual. Sleep had been elusive, fragments of the night before looping endlessly in his mind. The image of that little girl, standing in front of him with a cleaning cloth in hand, her voice calm and clear, haunted him. Lily. He had meant to call someone, HR, security, anyone, to report what happened. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't safe. But he hadn't. Instead, he had sat in the dark office for nearly an hour after she left, just thinking. And now, as he walked through the polished marble lobby and into the private elevator, he wasn't thinking about the meetings lined up on his calendar or the overseas investors waiting for a video call. He was thinking about a child who felt she had no other choice but to take her sick mother's place scrubbing floors. When he reached his floor, he heard the faint sounds of movement down the hallway, the soft shuffle of small feet, the quiet click of a spray bottle. He followed the sound, heart tightening. There she was. Lily. She stood on her tiptoes, wiping down a glass wall in the corridor with swift, practiced movements. Her dress, the same oversized maid uniform, looked even more worn in the daylight. Her ponytail was neater now, as if she had tried harder to look presentable. There was no one else in sight. She was working completely alone. Andrew watched for a few moments before stepping closer. Lily, he said softly. She turned quickly, startled, but didn't flinch. Good morning, Mr. Clark. You came back. I told you I would. Her voice was matter-of-fact, almost proud. I didn't finish the floor yesterday. He didn't know whether to be impressed or horrified. Lily, you're a child. This is not your job. You shouldn't be doing this. I can't just wait at home, she said, lowering the cloth. If I don't do something, she won't get better. We don't have any money left. He took a breath. Is anyone watching you? A neighbor, a family member? Anyone? She shook her head. Just me and Mom. Always. There was no bitterness in her voice, only fact. And that hit him harder than he expected. Where do you live? He asked. In Brooklyn. Near the park. It's not far if you take the train. But I walked yesterday. She hesitated. Didn't have enough for both the ride and dinner. Andrew closed his eyes for a second. This wasn't just an odd encounter anymore. This was survival. It wasn't about pride or stubbornness. This little girl was fighting for her mother's life the only way she knew how, by working. He knelt down to her level, something he hadn't done for anyone in years. What's wrong with your mom? Lily glanced down at the floor. She's really tired all the time. Her hands shake. She can't eat much. She says it's nothing, but she can't get out of bed now. She fainted last week. I made her some rice but she couldn't swallow it. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't cry. She just took a deep breath and kept looking straight ahead. She won't go to the doctor. She says we can't afford it. Andrew felt something tighten in his throat. This wasn't a problem he could ignore. Not anymore. He stood up slowly. Okay. Here's what we're going to do, he said, his voice gentle but firm. You're not going to work today. Or ever again. You're going to come with me, and we're going to see your mom. Together. Lily blinked. Why? Because I want to help. And because no one should go through this alone, especially not someone your age. For the first time, a flicker of hesitation appeared in her expression. People say that sometimes. And then they don't come back. I'm not them, Andrew replied. She studied him for a long moment. He wasn't sure what she saw in his face, sympathy. Sincerity. Maybe something he didn't even know was there himself. But eventually, she gave a tiny nod. Okay. He held out his hand. She looked at it, then slipped her small fingers into his palm. In that moment, the CEO of a billion-dollar company and a little girl from Brooklyn stood in the corridor of a glass tower, bound by something neither of them could explain. And as they stepped into the elevator, the world, his world, began to shift. That it was raining by the time Andrew's car pulled up to the hospital. The windshield wipers brushed rhythmically across the glass, but inside the black SUV, there was only silence. Lily sat in the back seat, her eyes fixed on the window. She didn't ask questions. She hadn't spoken much during the drive, only offering directions in short, careful sentences. Andrew noticed the way she clutched the strap of her small backpack, her knuckles pale from the pressure. "This is it," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Andrew glanced at the sign outside the building, a public hospital in the outer edge of Brooklyn. Old brick, peeling paint, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that hummed even from outside. A place where people went because they had no other choice. As they stepped out into the rain, Lily didn't seem to notice the water soaking into her worn shoes. She walked quickly toward the entrance, as if she was afraid he might change his mind. He followed her in, the scent of antiseptic and damp air hitting him immediately. The woman at the reception desk barely looked up. But when Lily gave her mother's name, the nurse hesitated. "She's still in room 214. Down the hallway, to the left," the woman said. Then her eyes flicked to Andrew, noting the expensive suit, the Rolex watch, the overall presence that didn't belong in a place like this. They walked in silence, the corridor dimly lit and lined with chairs that had seen better decades. Paint peeled from the walls in thin curls, and the air felt heavy with quiet suffering. Occasionally, a cough or the beep of a monitor echoed faintly from behind a closed door. When they reached the room, Lily paused. Her hand was on the doorknob, but she didn't open it right away. She turned to Andrew. "She doesn't like people seeing her like this," she said quietly. "She used to be really pretty. Always smiling." Andrew crouched a little so he could meet her eyes. "She's still your mom," he said. "And I promise, I'm here to help. Not to judge." She looked at him for a moment, as if searching his face for any sign of a lie. Then she nodded and pushed the door open. The room was small, with faded yellow walls and a single window that looked out onto a parking lot. The bed was positioned beneath a flickering ceiling light. And there, lying beneath thin hospital blankets, was Sarah. She looked far too young to be in that bed. No more than 30, with delicate features and a cascade of dark hair spread across the pillow. But her skin was pale, almost gray in the artificial light. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. Her frame was so thin it seemed like the blanket might crush her. "Mom," Lily said, stepping closer. Sarah stirred, eyes fluttering open. It took a second for her to focus, and when she did, the recognition was immediate. "Lily?" Her voice was dry, cracking. What are you doing here?" "You fainted again," Lily said softly, taking her mother's hand. "I brought someone. He wants to help." Sarah's eyes shifted, slowly, toward Andrew. At first, she just stared. Confused. Dazed. Then, a flicker of realization. And shame. You're Mr. Clark," she whispered, trying to sit up, then grimacing in pain. I'm sorry. She wasn't supposed to bother you. I told her not to." Andrew stepped forward. "Please. Don't apologize. She didn't bother me. She did what no child should ever have to do, she asked for help." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She turned away, swallowing hard. "I didn't know what else to do," she said. "I kept thinking I'd feel better tomorrow. That maybe if I just rested more, drank more water, it would go away. But I can't work anymore. I can barely stand. And I didn't want her to see me like this." Lily gripped her hand tighter. "I don't care," she said fiercely. I just want you to get better. Andrew stood quietly for a moment, watching them. A mother and daughter clinging to each other in a world that had given them no softness, no relief. And yet, somehow, they still had strength. More than most people he knew in boardrooms and penthouses. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. I'm transferring you to a private hospital, he said. You're going to get full tests, real care, and time to heal. And no, don't say anything. It's not charity. It's what you deserve. Sarah looked stunned. But, why? He hesitated for a second, and then spoke simply. Because no one helped me and my mother when we needed it. And I still think about that every single day. A long silence settled over the room. Lily looked up at him. Her eyes were still wide and cautious, but something new had entered them, hope. Sarah began to cry, not in gasping sobs, but soft, silent tears that slipped down her cheeks and soaked into the pillow. She said nothing else. She didn't need to. Andrew took a seat by the window, his eyes fixed not on his phone, not on his watch, but on the quiet connection unfolding in front of him. Something inside him shifted, deeper this time, not just pity, not just concern. Something more lasting. Something alive. And in that dim hospital room, for the first time in years, Andrew Clark stopped being a CEO, and started being something else. Someone human. The days that followed blurred together in a way Andrew Clark wasn't used to. His mornings, once dominated by executive summaries and conference calls, were now spent coordinating private doctors, arranging transportation, and dealing with the endless paperwork that came with transferring a patient from a public hospital to a private one. He didn't mind. Not once. Every phone call he made for Sarah felt like he was finally doing something meaningful with the influence he'd spent years building. Sarah was moved to a sleek, private medical facility on the Upper East Side, the kind of place where the rooms resembled hotel suites and the nurses actually had time to care. It was there that the truth of her condition fully came into view: severe anemia, malnutrition, untreated autoimmune complications, and early-stage organ fatigue. Her body had been breaking down for months. The doctors were shocked she was still functioning at all. And yet, what lingered in Andrew's mind wasn't the test results or medical terminology, it was the look on Sarah's face the first time she saw the new hospital bed, the warm light, the clean sheets. The disbelief. The gratitude she couldn't find the words for. And it was Lily, the way she refused to leave her mother's side, even sleeping curled up in the chair next to her, her small hand always resting on Sarah's arm like she was holding her to the world. Andrew started visiting them every evening. At first, it was just to check in, make sure the doctors were doing their job, that Lily had something decent to eat, that Sarah had someone to speak to other than overworked nurses. But slowly, it became more than that. It became something he looked forward to. He would bring Lily books, little puzzles, snacks from the cafe down the block. She would light up when she saw him walk in, her eyes lifting with a brightness he hadn't seen that first night in his office. One evening, after a long board meeting, he arrived to find Lily sitting in the hallway outside her mother's room, reading a paperback that was far too advanced for her age. She looked up as he approached. "They're letting her sit up now," she said with a grin. "She even ate half a sandwich today." "That's good," Andrew said, genuinely relieved. He took a seat next to her on the bench. "And how are you holding up, Nurse Lily?" She giggled. "I think I'm more like security. I tell people if she's too tired to talk. I even made a sign." From her bag, she pulled out a homemade door sign that read, "Resting. Come back later unless you're bringing cookies or kindness." Andrew laughed. A real laugh, the kind that pulled something warm from deep inside him. "I should hang one of those on my office door." Lily looked at him for a long moment, her expression growing serious. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "For us, I mean." He hesitated. No one had asked him that, not directly. The truth wasn't simple. It wasn't just pity, or obligation. There was something else. I don't really know, he said honestly. But I think I saw someone in you. And in your mom. Someone I used to know. Someone I wish had gotten help when they needed it. Lily nodded, like she understood. Then, after a pause, you don't have kids, do you? Andrew blinked, caught off guard by the question. No. I've never been married. You'd be a good dad, she said, without looking at him. You listen. He felt the air shift around them, that strange, quiet tension when something bigger is being said beneath the words. Before he could respond, the door opened and Sarah appeared, slowly, carefully, leaning on the frame. She wore a hospital gown and a pale blue robe, her dark hair brushed and pinned back. Though still weak, she no longer looked like a ghost. There was color in her cheeks. There was life in her eyes. You're up, Andrew said, standing immediately. Sarah smiled faintly. Thanks to you. He waved a hand. You did the hard part. I just called some doctors. No, she said gently. You did more than that. You saw us. Andrew didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't used to being seen either, not really. People saw the suit, the position, the numbers. But not the person. They helped her back into bed, and Lily perched beside her, taking over nurse duties again with the quiet seriousness of someone twice her age. Sarah leaned back against the pillows and looked at Andrew. You don't have to keep coming, she said softly. We'll be okay now. You've already done more than anyone ever has. I know I don't have to, he said. But I want to. Another silence. This one wasn't heavy, it was fragile, full of the beginnings of something unspoken. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep beside her mother and the room was quiet, Andrew sat in the visitor's chair, watching the rise and fall of Sarah's chest as she slept. He thought about his own mother, working 3 jobs while he did homework at the corner of a laundromat. He thought about how no one had ever helped them. And how, for years, he had believed that the only way to survive was to outwork, outsmart, and outrun everyone, alone. But now, something inside him was shifting. Something subtle, but irreversible. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was giving. He felt like he was receiving. Not power. Not gratitude. But connection. And he wasn't sure what that meant yet. But he knew he didn't want it to end. It was late afternoon when Sarah asked to speak to Andrew alone. The request came quietly. She had waited until Lily had fallen asleep after reading, curled into a corner of the hospital bed with her head resting gently against her mother's hip. Andrew had just brought them both chicken soup and sat in the armchair, thumbing through emails half-heartedly, when Sarah reached out and touched his wrist. Can we talk? She said softly, glancing toward the hallway. Andrew nodded. They stepped outside, closing the door behind them with care so as not to wake the sleeping child. The hallway was hushed. A nurse passed by with a clipboard and gave them a brief nod, but otherwise, it was just the two of them, standing beneath the flickering glow of a ceiling light. Sarah leaned gently against the wall, her frame still frail, but stronger than it had been days before. She looked up at him, eyes rimmed with something that looked like guilt. There's something I haven't told you, she began. Andrew felt his muscles tighten slightly. He wasn't sure why, maybe it was instinct. Years in business had taught him that sentences like that never led to anything easy. I wanted to earlier, she went on, but I didn't know how. And I was scared you'd think I only reached out because of it. But Lily didn't know. She just saw someone who could help. Someone kind. That was her heart, not mine. Andrew folded his arms but said nothing. He waited. Sarah took a breath. I know who you are, Andrew. I don't mean just as the CEO. I mean, who you really are. He raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? She swallowed, eyes searching his. My mother, her name was Marianne. She died when I was a teenager. She never told me much about my father, but when she did, she mentioned he had another family. A wife. A son. Her voice trembled. She said he had left her, and she never wanted to chase him. She was too proud. But she told me his name. Andrew felt the air around him shift, like a door opening somewhere deep in the past. A name. A buried memory. A fracture in a life he thought he had already made peace with. She told me his name was Charles Clark, Sarah said. That's your father, isn't it? Andrew's body went still. His heart thudded, not fast, not panicked, just heavy. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. Not since the funeral. Not since he had stood at the back of the church, not as a son in mourning, but as a stranger. He hadn't even cried. He didn't have it in him. Yes, he said after a long moment. That's my father. Sarah's voice broke. Then I think we're family. Silence fell like a curtain between them. Neither of them moved. It was a surreal moment, not cinematic or dramatic, but quiet and aching, like a truth that had been waiting in the shadows too long. Andrew turned and looked down the hall, toward the room where Lily slept. If what you're saying is true, he said carefully, then Lily is my niece, Sarah whispered. He closed his eyes. The weight of it was unbearable and, somehow, gentle all at once. I didn't want to tell you at first, Sarah said, her voice rushed now. I didn't want you to think that's why I let Lily go to your office. She didn't know any of it. I swear. She just wanted to help me. I've never told her anything about him. About your father. Or you. Andrew shook his head slowly, trying to absorb it. I grew up thinking I was an only child. So did I. He stared at the floor, as if the pattern in the tile might offer him clarity. Then he looked up again, his eyes darker than before, not with anger, but with the burden of sudden knowledge. I hated him, Andrew said finally. For what he did to my mother. For how he left us. I told myself for years that none of it mattered, that I didn't need anyone, didn't want anyone. But now. His voice trailed off. Sarah nodded. Me too. A long, still pause followed, not heavy this time, but necessary. Then, quietly, Andrew said, you could have told me the truth from the beginning. Why didn't you? Because I didn't know what kind of man you were. And I didn't want Lily hurt. That stopped him. He looked at her differently now, not just as a woman recovering in a hospital bed, not just as a mother or as someone from his father's shadowed past. But as someone who had done everything she could to protect the one thing that mattered to her most. He nodded, just once. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Sarah blinked back fresh tears, the corners of her mouth trembling. I believe you, she said. He stepped back toward the door of the hospital room. Inside, Lily shifted in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible as her arms curled tighter around the blanket. Andrew felt something rise in his chest that he hadn't felt in years, something bigger than anger or sadness. Something almost like belonging. As he stood in the doorway, a part of him still reeling, another part began to settle. To root itself in something real. He had come here to help a stranger. But he had found blood. And maybe, just maybe, a second chance at something he'd stopped believing in long ago, family. Andrew didn't sleep that night. He lay awake in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by everything that once represented comfort, the crisp sheets, the muted glow of a city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, the soft hum of silence broken only by the distant sounds of traffic, but nothing felt right anymore. Not after what he had learned. He was a man who lived by structure, by precision. Every hour of his day scheduled, every deal calculated down to the decimal. But the conversation with Sarah had thrown something loose inside him, something deep, something fragile. He had a sister. Half-sister, technically. But blood all the same. And he had a niece who had walked into his life not as family, but as a desperate little girl in a maid's dress, trying to clean her way into saving her mother's life. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. He thought about his own mother, the way she had shielded him from questions about his absent father. He had his own life, she would say whenever Andrew asked. And we have ours. She never sounded bitter. But there was always a sadness behind her smile. A sadness Andrew had inherited without realizing it, a silent belief that people left, that they broke you, and that the safest thing was to build high walls and never let anyone too close. That belief had built an empire. But it had also built a prison. The next day, Andrew returned to the hospital earlier than usual. He brought coffee for Sarah, hot chocolate for Lily, and a quiet resolve in his chest. He wasn't entirely sure what he was going to say, only that he needed to say something. When he entered the room, he found them both awake. Sarah was sitting upright, her dark hair freshly brushed, her skin already looking less pale than the day before. Lily was beside her, feeding her bits of banana from a plastic container with careful concentration. "Hey," Andrew said, standing in the doorway. "Good morning." They both looked up. Sarah smiled. Lily beamed. "You're early," Sarah said. "Trouble sleeping?" "Something like that," he replied, pulling up the chair near the bed. He sat in silence for a moment, watching them. The way Lily doted on her mother, her small hand gently brushing away a strand of hair. The way Sarah looked at her daughter like she was a miracle she still didn't believe she deserved. "I need to say something," Andrew said, finally. "To both of you." Lily looked up curiously. Sarah's expression shifted, wary but open. "I was angry last night," he admitted. "Not at you. Not even at him, my father. I was angry at the fact that no one told me. That all these years I thought I was alone. I thought my story was over. And then you appeared." He looked directly at Sarah. "You told me you were scared to say anything. That you didn't want Lily hurt. I get that now. I really do. But it also made me realize something." He turned to Lily, who blinked up at him with her wide brown eyes. "You trusted me before I gave you any reason to. You walked into that office with nothing but hope. And somehow, you believed I'd care. That I'd help. That I'd see you." Lily looked a little embarrassed, like she wasn't sure what she was supposed to say. Andrew smiled softly. "And I did. I saw you. Even before I knew you were family." There was a pause. Sarah's eyes shimmered with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "I've spent my whole life protecting myself," Andrew said. "Convincing myself that needing people made me weak. That if I just worked hard enough, stayed alone, I couldn't be hurt." He exhaled slowly. "But then you showed up, Lily. And you cracked something open." For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Lily reached forward and took his hand. "You didn't walk away," she said simply. Her voice was small but steady. A child's voice, but filled with an understanding far beyond her years. Andrew felt his throat tighten. He squeezed her hand back. "No," he said. "I won't. I promise." Sarah looked away, wiping a tear from her cheek, then turned back to him. "So what happens now?" Andrew stood, pacing the small space at the foot of the bed, his mind already a storm of logistics, plans, and decisions. "You focus on getting better," he said. "And after that, we talk about what comes next. Where you'll live. What Lily needs. What we need. Not as charity. Not as obligation. As family." Sarah's voice cracked. "Do you really mean that?" He nodded. "Every word." Just then, Lily leaned back against her pillow and yawned, her hand still holding Andrew's. "Can I come visit your office again?" she asked sleepily. "It's really clean there. I liked it." Andrew chuckled. "You can come visit anytime. But only as a guest. No more cleaning." She gave a dramatic sigh. "Okay. But I still think I did a good job." "The best," he said, and meant it. That night, as he stood by the window watching the sun lower itself over the city, Andrew felt something inside him settle, not like falling, but like arriving. The world hadn't changed. His past hadn't changed. But he had. And he wasn't alone anymore. By the time the trees outside began to shift from summer green to flecks of gold and burnt orange, Sarah was well enough to walk without help. Her steps were still cautious, and her energy came and went like the wind, but she no longer looked like someone fading. There was color in her cheeks again, strength returning to her posture, and laughter beginning to linger more often in her voice. The doctors were hopeful. Her treatments were working. Her weight was slowly rising. With proper rest, proper care, and the nourishment she had gone without for far too long, she was healing, not just physically, but piece by piece, emotionally too. Andrew had made sure of it. He hadn't just arranged her care, he had been there. Every day. Every evening. He had restructured his entire schedule around her and Lily, something his assistant had initially protested until he shut down every objection with a single look and the words, "This is more important." He started working from home more often, not because he couldn't handle the boardroom, but because, for the first time in his life, he had somewhere better to be. His penthouse, once a minimalist monument to solitude, had transformed. It was no longer pristine and silent. It was filled with Lily's books and stray socks, with Sarah's music playing softly in the background, with mismatched mugs and the smell of homemade soup. The guest room had become Lily's room, complete with fairy lights. She insisted on hanging herself and a hand-drawn sign on the door that said, "No meetings allowed unless you bring snacks." And then there were the photos that had never existed in Andrew's world before. On the side table, a framed picture of Lily and Andrew sitting on a park bench, both mid-laugh with ice cream dripping down their hands. Another on the kitchen counter, Sarah with her arm looped through Andrew's, both of them smiling at the camera like they'd been doing this forever. But they hadn't. It was still new. Still delicate. And yet it felt right. One evening, as the sky outside faded into a soft shade of lavender, Sarah stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of lentil soup while Lily perched on the countertop beside her, legs swinging. Andrew walked in, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, his tie loosened. He looked tired, not from work, but from the emotional weight he'd been carrying since the day Sarah told him the truth. The weight was lighter now, but it was still there. Grief didn't disappear just because joy arrived. The two could live side by side. Sarah noticed the look in his eyes immediately. She handed the spoon to Lily and wiped her hands. "Walk with me?" she asked softly. He nodded. They stepped out onto the small terrace that overlooked the city, the wind cool but not cold. Lights blinked across the skyline, the low hum of traffic a distant lullaby. Sarah leaned on the railing, arms crossed. "You've given us so much," she said. "More than I could ever repay." Andrew didn't look at her. He looked out at the horizon. "You don't have to repay me." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking, when I'm strong enough, I want to work again." Andrew turned to her. "You don't have to rush into anything. You're still recovering." "I know," she said. "But I don't want to just take. I want Lily to see me standing, not just surviving." He saw something in her eyes then, pride, but also fear. The kind of fear that came from a life of having everything taken from you when you weren't looking. "I don't want her to remember me as someone who needed saving," she added. "I want her to remember that we rebuilt." Andrew nodded slowly. "I have an idea." She raised an eyebrow. "You said once you used to volunteer with community programs. That you helped organize shelters, food banks, right? She nodded. Years ago. Before everything. Well, we're launching a new initiative at the company. A community foundation. Real support, housing, job training, medical access. We have the funding. What we don't have is someone who knows how it actually feels to be on the other side of it. Her eyes widened slightly. I want you to run it, Andrew said. We'll build it together. Sarah didn't speak for a long time. She looked at him, really looked, not as her savior, not as a CEO, not even as the man her daughter adored, but as someone who believed in her. You trust me with that? With my life, he said simply. She blinked hard, trying to keep her composure. Then yes. They stood together in silence after that. The kind of silence that says everything words can't. When they went back inside, Lily was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by paper and crayons. She looked up. I'm drawing our family, she announced. Wanna see? She held up the page. There were 3 stick figures holding hands, a tall one in a suit with brown hair and a crooked smile, a woman with long black hair and bright eyes, and a little girl in a pink dress. Above them, written in purple crayon, were the words, My Real Home. Andrew's heart stopped for a beat. Then something in his chest unfroze. Sarah leaned against his shoulder, quiet. He looked down at the drawing again, then at Lily, then at Sarah. Yeah, he said. That looks just about right. The sun was beginning to set over the Hudson River, casting a warm, amber glow through the windows of the event hall. The light danced across the polished floors and reflected off the tall glass panels, painting the room in hues of gold. It wasn't a corporate gala. Not this time. It was something different. Something personal. A soft hum of voices filled the air, laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses. People from all parts of Andrew's life were gathered, colleagues, old friends, the board, even a few local non-profit leaders. But there was no champagne tower, no $1 million light show, no high-strung speeches. Instead, on a modest stage at the front, a wooden plaque read, The Lily Foundation, because every family deserves a second chance. Andrew stood near the back for a moment, just watching. Watching the people mingle, watching the slideshow on the projector cycle through photos, not of executives and graphs, but of real people. Community kitchens. Shelter renovations. Mobile clinics. Children laughing. Sarah organizing volunteers. Lily hugging one of the nurses who helped her mother walk again. He hadn't spoken yet. He was waiting. For them. And then he saw them. Sarah entered first, her hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder. She wore a simple but elegant pale yellow dress, her hair pinned back in soft waves, her posture steady and confident. A far cry from the fragile woman who once lay trembling in a hospital bed. Lily walked beside her, in a light blue dress that twirled every time she spun, which, of course, she did, every 10 steps. She waved excitedly when she saw Andrew, then made a beeline for the dessert table, with Sarah calling after her and laughing. Andrew met Sarah halfway. She looked up at him, her smile quiet but full of something deeply settled. Peace, maybe. Or joy. Possibly both. Do you remember, she asked, the first time we met? I remember a little girl walking into my office thinking she could clean her way into saving a life, he said with a half smile. She almost did. They stood there for a while, not speaking. The weight of everything they had come through hung in the silence between them, not heavy, but sacred. Grief, recovery, healing, forgiveness. It all lived there, wrapped in the small moments they now shared without needing to explain them. Then, with a soft nudge of her elbow, Sarah said, They're waiting for you. He looked toward the stage. Someone was at the microphone announcing his name. The applause had started. He stepped forward slowly, his heart hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with nerves. For a man who delivered keynote addresses to investors, Fortune 500 CEOs, and international think tanks, this moment felt far more daunting. When he reached the podium, the room quieted. He looked out over the crowd, then beyond them, to the glass windows where the sky outside had turned orange and purple, as if the city itself had paused to listen. He took a breath. "Thank you for being here," he began. "This isn't just the launch of a program. It's the continuation of a story. A story I never thought would be mine." He glanced toward Lily and Sarah, who stood near the front now, listening closely. "A little over a year ago, I was alone. I didn't think I was, of course. I thought I was doing everything right. Building things. Growing. Succeeding. But the truth is, I was standing on a glass floor. Solid looking from the top, but hollow underneath." He paused. Not a single person stirred. "And then one day, a little girl walked into my office. And she didn't ask for charity. She didn't cry. She didn't even ask for sympathy. She just asked to work. To save her mother. She asked for a chance." His voice wavered for a moment, but he steadied it. "And that chance turned into something I didn't know I needed. She didn't just change my day, or my company. She changed me. She reminded me what family means, even when it's found in the most unexpected way." He looked at Sarah then. Their eyes met. So much passed between them in that look that the audience would never fully understand. "And now," he continued, "we're building something together. For the families who've been forgotten. For the ones who fell through the cracks like we almost did. For every kid who ever thought they had to grow up too fast. This foundation isn't just named after Lily. It's because of Lily. Because sometimes, the smallest voices carry the loudest truths." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous or forced, it was genuine. People stood. Some were wiping their eyes. And Lily, small but radiant in her blue dress, clapped the loudest of all. Afterward, as the room filled again with music and warmth, Andrew stepped off the stage and went to her. She looked up at him and said, "Was that scary?" He knelt to her level. "A little. You didn't sound scared." "That's because I saw you." Lily threw her arms around his neck. "Love you, Uncle Andrew." He hugged her tightly, unable to speak for a moment. His throat was thick. His chest ached with everything he was finally allowed to feel. "I love you too," he whispered. Later that night, when the guests had left and the lights were dimming, Andrew stood on the rooftop alone for a moment. The air was cooler now. Autumn had arrived for real. The sky above was dark and quiet, stars just starting to pierce through the city haze. Sarah came up behind him, her arms folded against the breeze. "Everything's different now," she said. He nodded. "I know. You okay with that?" He looked at her and smiled. A real smile. The kind that starts deep and stretches into the soul. "I've never been more okay in my life." Then they stood together, side by side, looking at the skyline not as strangers or survivors, but as something far stronger. A family. And for the first time in his memory, Andrew Clark didn't feel like he was looking out at the world alone. This story isn't just about wealth or family secrets, it's about the quiet, powerful transformation that happens when someone lets go of control and learns how to feel again. The ending, for me, is less about resolution and more about awakening. Andrew, a man built from precision, discipline, and isolation, doesn't just discover he has a sister and a niece, he discovers what it means to belong. And that's something no fortune, no title, no skyline view can replace. Lily is the spark, the small but unstoppable force of innocence and love that pierces the hardest armor. Sarah is the mirror, she holds up all the struggle and sacrifice, and yet still stands with grace. And Andrew? He learns that strength doesn't always look like control. Sometimes, it looks like showing up. Like listening. Like staying. The beauty of this ending lies in its softness. It doesn't shout. It breathes. It allows the characters to step into the unknown, not with certainty, but with connection. They are, finally, a family. Not perfect. Not complete. But real. And in a world so often filled with isolation and noise, that kind of quiet, chosen love is the most radical ending of all.